welcome all to the class. Thank you for coming. And let's start. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, last time I've shared a few audio files, and I first wanted to ask if anybody has tried some of them, has experienced anything, would like to share anything. Yes?
Yes, there was a few days where there were like loudspeakers going on during the afternoon, and I was trying with brown and pink noise.
Yes.
And that really worked, and I realized that one type of noise is like too much agitating my mind and making it exhausting. And I guess, I don't remember which, but the other one was more in the background and subduing the outside loudspeaker. And then I found out that I can do both, having those and having earplugs. And that was like taking away everything, and my mind remained fresh.
Yeah, especially when it's loud outside, it's really helpful too.
Yeah, but I also experienced that the noise, like the pink noise or brown noise, one of them is also exhausting for my mind. And I have to find one frequency which is like not exhausting.
That's exactly, because everybody has a different experience. That's why I send a variety also, because you have to see for yourself which one you resonate with. It's an individual experience. But in general, they facilitate different states. Is this too? No? Okay. So, generally you can say pink noise goes into alpha state, and the brown noise goes more alpha theta. So, no, they're going into deep states. But it's possible that you're on the day you don't. There's some reason why you don't resonate with one and more with the other.
Yeah, I have to reflect again what is alpha and alpha theta, you said.
Yeah. Alpha, beta is the state of mind where we are alert and active, and that's the normal, daily dealings, where we are a little bit maybe also in stress.
And what is white? I heard that there is also a white noise. What is white noise doing?
White noise is very similar, but it's a little bit more, it can be a little bit more agitating. So the pink noise is softer. Some people experience the white noise as a little bit more, not so calming. But basically they all have the same result, the same effect. Okay, anybody else? Share any? No? Anybody online? Okay, so then I just want to do a short recap about this whole seminar, how we started. This is about exploring mind and consciousness, what we can do with our mind, which we usually do not do. And we started out with brain and consciousness, how that's related, opinions of modern science compared to the Vedic view. And then we looked at the brain halves, so left and right hemisphere, the difference between them, how they can be used. Then how frequencies can influence our brain waves, brainwave entrainment. And that's being done by the Monrie Institute. We have seen that video, how Bob Monroe started that, how he got into that. And now we'll look a little bit deeper. So I'm sharing the screen. So the Gateway Voyage, or Gateway Experience, as it was called later, was developed from these early experiments with sound and sound wave in the Monroe Institute with volunteers. And last time we have heard an excerpt of a video where one volunteer was in one of these booths where they get headphones and then they hear the sounds, binaural beats and different frequencies, modulated frequencies in their ears, which create a certain effect in the brain waves. And then they go into a very deep state of delta while still a part of the brain is in beta to be able to communicate. Otherwise, if they are only in delta state, they would not be able to communicate outside. So in that way, and there were not many people who were able to do that, to speak at the same time and be in delta. But there were a few who were trained and who brought these results. The one which we heard last time about one of these lost souls who were in between, not really knowing that they were dead, and there are many of these in the medium state, very close still to the physical, not able to let go because of attachment. So there are many of these explorer tapes available from the Monrie Institute. They did a lot of research with scientists, and with control rooms, measuring the brain waves, knowing what's going on. So the gateway experience has developed from that. So the gateway experience is a voyage of self-discovery through the gateway of expanded awareness. This is how Bob Monroe called it, and he said it makes you free. It makes you free of death, and that is actually a fact. Many, many people, after they go through this, feel completely changed. The whole life changes, basically. They have experiences, they have realizations, insights, healing. It's absolutely amazing. It is life-changing, I must say. I mean, I agree with that. It is really life-changing, especially because you experience yourself as consciousness separate from the body. We know that in theory, but it's different to really experience it. To experience that you're that, and that you can go into various areas. It's a journey inside, and it's also a journey outside. It's actually both, and it's very, very fascinating. It's done with relaxation and deep meditation techniques. The Hemosync audio is used for that, and visualization and energy work. It gives the ability to think, perceive, and be conscious without the input of the 5 physical senses beyond the body. So this is also something to experience, because we are always bombarded by sensory input through our senses. Now, to have an experience without these and to still fully function in a subtle body, basically, is something we usually do not experience. And these are expanded states of awareness, and the good thing is, or the amazing thing is, that the left brain is still fully functionable. So that's why it's both brain halves work completely in unison together. So on the one hand, you get into these states of expanded awareness with the help of the audio technique, and at the same time you are always fully in control, and you can guide yourself. You can shift or phase between different states of consciousness. And this is so you have control over consciousness at all the time of the experience, and the ability to recall and access it at will. Unlike in states like sleep, where you have no control. Because what happens usually is we shift from one state of consciousness or awareness to the other, but we don't have much control over it. For example, we're sitting in class and suddenly the mind goes away and we start thinking of something else. The mind shifts, so the input of the physical senses is still there, but because the mind is not there, most of it is blocked and the mind is somewhere else engaged. Or we're daydreaming, we're completely somewhere else. We're not knowing what's going on. Or when we fall asleep, and we usually don't have control. We just fall. That's it. So with this technique, you have control over it. You go into different states, which Monroe called focus levels. So there are specific defined levels which can be reached on later. They can be reached even without the audio input, and this is something which is also very wonderful. You don't need anything, basically. You don't need technical devices, you don't need medicines, nothing. You just need your brain, basically, your mind. So that's that. And then because that's so fascinating, the CIA got interested in that. Because they thought, wow, this is wonderful. We will see the history a little later, have another slide for that. But when in the period of the Cold War, 70s, they heard that the Russians were experimenting with psychic spying. And they thought, wow, I mean, we have to do also something. Then they recruited their remote viewers and they started that. And then, because the Monroe Institute was doing this consciousness research, they thought maybe this is something interesting which we could also use. And in fact, and we see that also, all the soldiers of the CIA had to go through the gateway experience. There was a big report done by the CIA about the whole thing, with scientists trying to explain the different states of consciousness. It's quite amazing. I have a slide for that also. So why did they do that? Because they saw the potential for mind control and psychological warfare techniques, and for understanding the nature of reality, consciousness, and human potential for advanced problem solving. Of course, they were more interested in the psychological warfare techniques. And the interesting thing is that it did not really work, because when these people, the remote viewers, went into these states, they didn't feel anymore like being violent, doing anything. They've had this feeling of everything is one, everything is so beautiful, there's love, and it was just the opposite of battling and going to war. So that's why ultimately they found other techniques. That was one of the reasons why it was not exactly in line with their intentions. So this is a video. This is, I can see it again and again. It's quite funny actually, about a soldier of the CIA who was sent there in a secret mission to the Monroe Institute to find out what it is. So I'll play it for you.
I need to tell you a little bit more how I met Robert Monroe, the founder of the Monroe Institute. This place called the Monroe Institute. I went down to the Monroe Institute and met Mr. Monroe. Now you can't, he lived at this place called the Whistlefield Farm then, which was not where the Monroe Institute's located right now. And I met him in his little screened-in porch there. I actually sat on the divan there. No, I sat in the funny chair there, and he was sitting over on the couch on the divan when I met him. And I couldn't say to him, Mr. Monroe, I'm with this secret program where we're going to try to train remote viewers, because it was secret. You can't tell him about it, right? But I told him I had read his book. There was only one book at that time, Journeys Out of the Body, and that I was interested in his sound process that was mentioned in this book, the hemisync process, because I had had many childhood experiences about which I was reminded upon reading his book. And he persisted on asking me to describe those childhood experiences to him, and eventually invited me to go into his laboratory. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And he said, well, the only way, we're going to be able to tell you about this hemisync is for you to find out for yourself. And so he took me into the laboratory. And in his laboratory, we met a receptionist and walked down a hallway where I saw a room with tape recorders and lights and switches in it. And I thought, oh, I'd like to go in there. I'm sort of a gadget kind of a guy, and I thought I'd like to see what that was all about. But he had a different idea and encouraged me to walk on down the hallway and turn into the next room. The next room simply had a strange bed that was built back into the wall. And he told me to lay down in that bed and put on the headphones. And I was like a little bit concerned, because I was there as a military officer on an official mission, and I wasn't about to do anything weird. But I asked him what kind of sounds he might play for me, and he said very casually, oh, at first we'll play some music just to relax you. And that sounded interesting, so I sat on the bed and put the headphones on and then laid down. Well, the minute I laid down, the lights in the room went out and the door closed. And I was a little bit worried, because he had said, we'll play music at first. And what did he mean by at first we'll play some music? Well, within a few seconds there was some music, so I was encouraged to think that this man was truthful, he was honest, he said he'd play music, and he did play some music. And after that, the music went away and faded into the sounds of the ocean, surf sounds. And Bob Monroe came on my headphones and said, "And here's the sound of surf, a symbol of the power of sound here at the Monroe Institute." And I thought, well, that's a commercial announcement, obviously, and I recognize that. And the surf rolled in and rolled out, and it made me feel good. I was raised in California, so this reminded me of my own childhood. And after a while, the surf sort of faded away, but left a kind of rushing or hissing sound, and a slow droning sound, a wah, 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 droning sound in the background. And I wondered what that was and where that sound was coming from. And then I began to feel something, a visceral body feeling. The bed began to rise up to the ceiling, and I thought, oh, this bed is special. It's just like when you get your oil changed in the gas station and they raise the car up in the air. He must be able to raise this bed up in the air in the same way. And I tried to listen to see if I could hear an air compressor running in the background, but I couldn't. And I couldn't figure out how they built this bed. I was quite an analytical kind of person, and it was very interesting to me. I wondered how strong it was, and maybe someday at my house I could get one of these and I could change my own oil in my car. But this feeling of moving up into the air changed, and I began to sense lateral movement, a movement sideways, much like being in an airplane and the pilot says, "It's now time for landing, please fasten your seatbelts," and you're suddenly aware of the movement of the airplane. It was that same kind of body sensation of movement. And accompanying this movement was a visual perspective of huge boulders or crystals passing by me as though I was moving through a passageway of some kind. But I had a rather silly thought. I thought I must be inside of a flavor straw. I remember as a kid you could drink water or milk through a straw and it would flavor it with sugar crystals. And I had this silly notion that I was inside of a flavor straw. And Bob Monroe's voice came over my earphones and said, "Well, what's happening?" And I said, "Well, I seem to be going someplace." And he said, "Well, where you going, kid?" And I said, "I don't know. This is your place. I don't know where I'm going." After a period of time, I came to what I assumed was the end of this passageway or this flavor straw in my thinking, and I began to poke my head out of the end of the flavor straw, and my entire perspective changed, and I was in a boundless, open, white space, watching myself come out of the end of this flavor straw. And it was very meaningful, like, wherever you go, there you are. Which sounds stupid, I know, but at the time, in this state of consciousness, it was, I've come all of this way to find out I'm already here. And this revelation must have led to some sort of an utterance or, oh, ah, because immediately Mr. Monroe's voice was in my headphones saying, "Well, what happened?" And I had forgotten all about Mr. Monroe. I was so embarrassed. I was so involved in this journey that I'd forgotten all about him. And in my embarrassment, in my frustration, I just said, "Oh, well, I'll just have to tell you about this later. It's okay, I'll tell you later." Well, he left me in this white space for I don't know how long, some length of time. I think something must have happened to me there, but I can't remember what it was. The next thing I remember him saying was, "It's time for lunch." And I thought about that, and I thought about that. I had no idea what lunch was, and wherever I was in this white space, they don't do lunch there. It didn't make much sense, but that didn't seem to matter because he changed the sounds I was listening to. He lowered the bed back down to the floor again, and before I knew it, he came through the door and the lights were on, and I sat up in bed and I was like, what in the world has happened? And I took my headphones off and I leaned down to look under the bed, and he said, "What, did you drop your wallet down there or something?" And I said, "No, I have my wallet, it's okay." And I was puzzled and wondering about what had happened to me and what were these sounds? Well, he was encouraging me to get outside and get out in the sunlight and sort of get grounded, get back to earth, as it were. And then we went on up to lunch. And sitting at lunch, we had to drive about 45 minutes, I guess, to get to a place for lunch. And sitting at lunch, we ordered our meals, and then we were waiting for the meals to come. It's sort of an awkward time when you have to try to make some conversation. And I very innocently turned to him and said, well, Mr. Monroe, when you raised the bed up, and he looked at me and said, I didn't raise the bed up. And I was thinking about that and trying to figure out, well, what had happened? And then I realized and said, oh, it had taken me about 45 minutes to try to understand, try to comprehend what had happened to me. And then I got very excited. Secretly in the back of my mind, I thought, boy, this would really be good for the remote viewers. But to him I said, what is the power in those sounds? How did those sounds make that happen? And he kept backing away and he said, no, the sounds didn't make that happen. That was your experience. The sounds only put you in a state of consciousness that we call body asleep, mind awake. And what you did in that state of consciousness was up to you. Well, I didn't know if I believed him so much, but I was very curious about what is it that makes this hemisync work? And when I went back to my military superiors at Fort Meade, I didn't tell them all the things that had happened to me that day. But I did recommend that when our remote viewers became practiced enough in remote viewing, that this may be a form of advanced training for them.
Okay.
What is it saying, hemisync?
Hemisync is the audio. The technique, the audio technique is called hemisync because it synchronizes the hemispheres. Hemisync, yeah.
So actually the bed didn't move, but
Yes.
you had the feeling.
Exactly. You get, yeah. And that's what they do, these sounds, yeah.
I think I've had that experience.
That's very possible. That's very possible. Actually,
Without the hemisync?
it's 25% of all the population have had that experience. They may not be fully aware of it. Actually, we have this experience every night. We're just not aware of it. That's the thing.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now you're telling us?
Mm-hmm. So this is just a screenshot of that of the assessment of the CIA of the gateway process. It's a long paper, and 29-page report. So the history is, as I had already mentioned, in '72, a classified report circulates in the US military and intelligence communities claiming that the US Union is pouring money into research involving ESP and mind control for its Cold War espionage purposes. And then in '83, this report by the CIA was produced, which provided a scientific framework for the understanding and expanding human consciousness out of body experience and altered state of mind. And in 2003, this CIA report was declassified as part of the routine review. That's what they always do with all the documents, and also to make it available to the public. And since then, many people have become aware of it, and it has sparked interest, still does. So, OBE is a part of that, of course, can be experienced in many different ways, and all religious groups and cultures have had different systems to explore beyond the limits of matter. And we all know that there are different bodies. We don't only have the physical body, but we have several layers of bodies. And according to our Vedanta system, there are these 5 sheets which cover the Atma. I'll just quickly go over it because I think you are aware of that. It's the Annamaya Kosha, which is the physical body, which is nourished by water and food, and it's visible to everybody. Then the Pranamaya Kosha, Babaji had recently also mentioned it in class, which is already a subtle body, an energy body, through which the prana circulates and which is moving through the nadis, energy channels of the body, and it governs breath, circulation, digestion, and the overall vitality. Then we have the manomaya kosha, the mental body, which is related to thoughts, emotions, perceptions, sensory processing. This is where desires, fear, and attachments reside. Then we have the Vijnanamaya kosha, according to Vedanta, which is even more subtle, a seat of intuition, discernment, helps in self-awareness and decision-making beyond conditioned mind patterns. And then the Anandamaya kosha, causal body, which is the most subtle layer and closest to Atma. There are different ways to categorize them. Some people just put all the subtle together, subtle bodies, gross body, subtle body. But we know that there are different densities of subtle bodies, and that is also one reason, if you remember that video, which we saw last time, that being which was beyond that veil, he said the person who had died, this Patrick, was not able to perceive him because his body was more gross, and that body of this helper there was more subtle. So therefore he needed this energy channel in order for communication. So it seems that because of the different layers of density, bodies cannot perceive. It depends on your frequency, which you can perceive and which you cannot perceive. So I found it very, very fascinating, this Bhagavad Gita verse, which we all know. Yam yam vapisvaram bhavan bhajyatanti kalevaram tam tam evati kauntiya sada tad bhava bhavitaha. Whatever object one thinks of while dying, that and only that he attains, being constantly absorbed in thoughts of it. So we take our state of consciousness with us when we die. And this is something I have seen again and again confirmed from various sources, from that side and from that side. And that's also what we saw in this example of that sailor, because his consciousness was still on the boat. He thought he was grabbing that log because he thought, I'm drowning if I don't grab onto the log which keeps me in the water. And he thought he was for 9 hours in the water while it has been over 100 years. But he couldn't let it go because that was his state of mind. He thought he's a soldier, he's a cook in the ship, and the ship kitchen had exploded. He couldn't see the ship. He couldn't see any of his other boatsmen. He only had the log, and he could not let go. And only when he was told that he can let it go, then he was able to move on. So there's another person, William Buhlmann, who has explored the non-physical realm for the last 30 years. And he has written also a lot of books, and there are videos about him. So he, from his own experience, he has come up with a few points which I also find quite interesting, because he does not know our philosophy about body and Atma and how we go, nothing like that. And still, his experience very much matches that. And I find this fascinating, first of all, because it gives us a confirmation, and is something also which we can tell other people, because that information, that experience is there and it can be experienced. So that is one, that we are spiritual beings temporarily using a biological body for experience and expression. That's number one. Number two, since a physical body is a temporary vehicle, it is only natural for us to be able to separate from it and experience our non-physical self. It is closer to our real self than the physical body. Out of experiences are the normal shift or transfer of awareness from our physical body to one of our higher frequency energy vehicles or subtle bodies. But mostly it happens when we are unaware of it, sleep. We are simultaneously using and controlling multiple energy bodies. Each of these energy vehicles exists at a distinctly different density and vibrational frequency. Ideally, all of our energy vehicles work in harmony to assist in our personal development. We see that also with people who are, out of sync or out of phase. Somebody who is a little bit deranged. So that means that their mental bodies, their subtle bodies are not in harmony with their physical. So that causes split personalities, all these disorders, personality disorders are because of that. And we create our individual reality by the way we focus and manage our personal thought energy. What we experience has been influenced, arranged, and manifested by our conscious and subconscious thoughts. So that we hear also a lot, that in that non-physical realm, thoughts are immediately materialized. I mean, whatever you think, it immediately happens there. So one has to be extremely careful of a thought process. And I have given that example from Vaikuntha also, about a person under a kalpavriksha tree. Huh?
Not him. You said from Vaikuntha.
No, it applies to everybody. So to him. So there also we have this example of thought materializing immediately. Okay, so there's a short video clip, just a few minutes, where he makes this point.
Well, I think we exist beyond emotion. We exist beyond the emotional body, which is the astral body. We exist beyond the intellect. That's one of the things that I've learned over the decades. And you can't explain it because the mind is also a vehicle and a tool that we use. And we identify with it because we use it so much. As a writer, I've written books, so I use my mind extensively. It doesn't mean that I am it, though. That's what really gets exciting, this idea that I am beyond even my emotions and my mind. There's a core part of me that exists beyond that.
Okay, just to make this point, which we already know, but it's nice to hear that from this source also. So we have another...
The Moore Show is supported by Mindscape.
Okay.
In hundreds and hundreds of my experiences, I have experienced similar realities. I call them consensus realities. At death, people go to the reality that conforms to their concepts of a physical-like reality. And what many people don't seem to understand is that there's countless millions of realities because the universe is thought responsive. So we will go to the reality initially, and that's clearly what I was presenting in the book. The character goes to the reality that resonated with his state of consciousness. And then as he, let's just say, awakens to the fact that there's more than this, it's a pleasant heaven. He experiences, it's much more pleasant than the physical world, and it's much more beautiful. But he realizes there's severe limitations also, because it is created by the group mind of the inhabitants. And there are millions of these realities. For instance, a right-wing Christian would not experience the same kind of afterlife as a right-wing Muslim would. They would enter consensus realities that may be dramatically different because people go to what resonates with them. What I wanted to get across was the multidimensionality of the universe and how that we limit ourselves by what we believe. And once you open up to the totality of yourself, you can begin to experience the full beauty and spectrum of our magnificent universe and it's all for us. But people limit themselves, and that's what I really tried to get across in a dramatic way. That's why on page 7 I had the main character die.
Okay.
He's describing Lila Smaran, in other words, because you have to direct your Lila Smaran. Oh, might be good. It reminds me of Lila Smaran, because that's what you do in Lila Smaran. Once you become familiar with Lila Grantas, within the parameters of Lila Grantas, Krishna takes a comb and combing Radharani's hair. But someone is there who is handing him the comb. And what is the comb made of? Yeah. Or Krishna puts jasmine flowers in Radharani's hair, but someone is picking up the flowers, someone is giving. So you have to imagine or to visualize and direct your own meditation.
Yeah. It's actually a universal principle. It applies to everything. Where you put your thought energy in, and that's exactly that Bhagavad Gita verse. And I think it's so that means we really have to be very, very aware of what we think, and because we have no control exactly at the time of death. So that's why we better focus now, and then that will manifest. But in that afterlife, there's also there are journeys explained. So there's also development. It's not that there's no choice, but the place where we reach, at least that corresponds with what we think, and then whether we move on from there or whatever happens then, that we have to see. That's okay. So this is very close to.
One more comment. Mm-hmm. It leads back to the main theme of what you presented at first, is that you become what you focus on.
Exactly. That's exactly.
Which is the words of the Gita.
Yes, absolutely. So we have this Dr. Bruce Grayson, is also an interesting personality. He's a hardcore scientist, and he had some experiences, especially with his own patients, and I think he himself also, where he thought, what they all experienced, there must be something which is not explained by science. So he says it became less and less plausible to believe that the brain creates all our thoughts and feelings, or that those things stops when the brain dies, which is not in line with what he was taught in his school and scientific upbringing. But that's the conclusion he came to. And in an interview, I'm reading that, he says it usually happens. He speaks about people who are about to die, when they're very close to death, or sometimes when they're pronounced dead, like when their heart stops, they would typically feel that their thoughts are going faster and clearer than ever. They have a strong sense of time stopping or slowing down. They have very strong emotions, usually positive emotions, feeling a tremendous feeling of love and peace. They may have what we call paranormal sensations, for lack of a better word. They feel that they're leaving their bodies, and they may encounter other entities that they think are deceased loved ones, or sometimes divine beings, and eventually they may review their lives and then either decide to come back to life or are sent back against their will. So we have an interview with him, and then we have another one. If that gets too long, it's 10 minutes, it's 7 minutes.
When I first started looking into near-death experiences back in the late 1970s, I assumed that there would be some physiological explanation for that. What I found over the decades was that the various simple explanations we could think of, like lack of oxygen, drugs given to the people, and so forth, don't pan out. The data do not support them. And furthermore, the phenomena of NDEs, of near-death experiences, seem to defy a simple materialistic explanation. When we first started presenting this material in medical conferences, there would be a polite silence in the audience. And now, in the 21st century, when we do this, it's rare that doctors don't stand up in the audience and say, "Let me share my experience with you." So it's pretty well accepted now that these are common experiences that people have all the time and that have profound effects. There's still, of course, a lot of controversy about what causes them, but not about the fact that they exist and are fairly common. I'm Bruce Grayson. I'm a professor emeritus of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia Medical School, and I've recently come out with a book called After. A doctor explores what near-death experiences reveal about life and beyond. Near-death experiences are profound, subjective experiences that many people have when they come close to death, or sometimes when they are in fact pronounced dead. And they include such difficult-to-explain phenomena as a sense of leaving the physical body, reviewing one's entire life, encountering some other entities that aren't physically present, and at some point coming to a point of no return beyond which they can't continue and still come back to life. When they return, they often are profoundly changed by this experience. As I started my psychiatric training, I started being confronted by patients' reports of things that I couldn't explain. One happened to me when I was just a few weeks into my training. I was asked to see a patient who had overdosed in the emergency room. And I was in the cafeteria when the page came in, and I was eating dinner, and the page startled me, and I dropped my fork, spilling spaghetti sauce on my tie. Couldn't wipe it off, so I just covered it over with a lab coat so no one would see it. And then I went down to the emergency room to see the patient, and she was completely unconscious. I could not revive her. But her roommate was waiting to see me down the hall in another room. So I went down to the other room, talked to the roommate for about 15 or 20 minutes, and there was no air conditioning back in the 70s, so I unbuttoned my lab coat so I wouldn't sweat so much, exposing the stain for about 10 minutes or so. I then went back to see the patient. She was still unconscious. When I went to see her in the morning, I introduced myself, and she stopped me and said, "I know who you are. I remember you from last night." That puzzled me, so I said something like, "Well, I'm surprised. I thought you were unconscious when I saw you last night." And she looked at me and said, "Not in my room. I saw you talking to my roommate down the hall." She sensed my confusion and started to tell me about the conversation I had with her roommate, where we were sitting, what we were talking about, and finally she said, "And you had a striped tie on with a red stain on it." That just blew me away. I didn't know how to deal with that. I couldn't think of any logical reason, any explanation for how she could have known about that spaghetti stain. Nobody had seen it except her roommate, and she hadn't talked to the roommate since she came into the hospital. As a scientist, I knew I had to study this. It didn't make any sense to me. But scientists don't run away from things they don't understand. They run towards them. I never expected to spend so much time looking into near-death experiences. I thought at first it was just a strange anomaly. I'd spend a few years looking at them, find the physiological explanation, and put it behind me. I collected about 1,000 cases that people had sent to me about their own near-death experiences. Quickly realized that the stories I was getting from people who volunteered their stories to me were the same as the ones from people I interviewed in the hospital. We studied the physiological events around the near-death experience, psychological traits of the experiencers, and so forth, trying to find some logical explanation for these events. Most of us are taught that the mind is what the brain does, that all our thoughts, our feelings, our perceptions, our memories are all created by the brain. However, that's not the whole story, and we have hundreds and hundreds of experiences that occur during a cardiac arrest or deep anesthesia when we know the brain is not capable of functioning well enough to create complex thoughts and feelings and memories. Most near-death experiencers say that in the near-death experience, their senses were incredibly heightened, and they often report hearing sounds they'd never heard on Earth and seeing colors that they'd never seen before. And when they come back, they don't know how to describe these things because there aren't words for them to describe them. One person said to me, it's like trying to draw an odor with a crayon. But they talk about their senses being so much more vivid in the NDE, and that gives the experience a sense of being more real than this world is. Most near-death experiencers are pretty much the same around the world and through the centuries. Pliny the Elder wrote about a case like this in ancient Rome in the 1st century. We've gotten examples of near-death experiences from Western Europe, from the Middle East, from Asian cultures, Hindu Buddhist cultures, and from early cultures, Australian Aborigines and Native American societies that sound just like the stories we have today. However, how they describe these phenomena is influenced by their cultural background. For example, people all around the world will talk about encountering a warm, loving being of light that radiates unconditional love towards them. And if you're talking to someone who is raised in the United States, they may identify this as God or sometimes Jesus, whereas someone who is in a Hindu or Buddhist culture will not use those terms. Some of the lessons that near-death experiencers bring back from this event relate to what they find makes life meaningful and fulfilling for them. And the primary thing they talk about is this sense of being interconnected with other people, about how to make this life more meaningful, more purposeful, more fulfilling. I think a reason many people find near-death experiences interesting is because they hold out the promise that will explain to us what the soul is, whether there is an afterlife after our bodies decompose. And I think those are good questions. I don't think that's the most important part of the near-death experience. I think they do tell us something about the possibility of surviving bodily death. But I think the important part of near-death experiences is what they tell us about this life we're in now.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers. And to learn even more from the world's biggest thinkers, get Big Think Plus for your business.
Okay, we have one more. Does anybody know this Anita Moorjani? She has written a book. She's speaking on a TED. It's an amazing story. And we just have time for that if you want to watch that. It's quite amazing. That's her own story.
Such a thrill for me to be here. And I'm so happy to see all of you. You know, one of the biggest reasons that I'm happy to be here is because I shouldn't be alive today. I should have died on February the 2nd, 2006. That was supposed to be my last day here in this physical life. Because on that day, the doctors had told my husband and my family that I only had a few more hours to live. I was dying from end-stage lymphoma, which is a form of cancer of the lymph nodes. I had struggled with cancer for 4 years up to that point. For 4 years, this disease had devoured my body. It had traveled through my lymphatic system. It started with a lump in my neck, and then it spread throughout my lymphatic system. And by that point, by the end of 4 years, I had tumors, some of them the size of lemons, that had spread from the base of my skull all around my neck, down into my chest, under my arms, and all the way to my abdomen. By that point also, even before I had gone into the coma, my lungs had been filled with fluid. And every time I would lie down, I would choke on my own fluid. My muscles had completely deteriorated, so I weighed about 85 pounds. I looked like just a skeleton with skin on. I had these big, gaping, open skin lesions where the toxins were oozing out of my body. I wasn't able to digest any food. I had a persistent low-grade fever. I couldn't walk because my muscles had been deteriorated, so I was constantly just lying down or being taken around in a wheelchair. I was connected to an oxygen tank all the time. I couldn't breathe without the aid of oxygen. And on that morning, on February the 2nd, 2006, I went into a coma. The doctors had said these were my final hours because now my organs had shut down. My organs were failing. So my family were told that if there was anybody that had to see me before I died, this was the time. Unbeknownst to everyone around me, though, even though it appeared that I was in a coma and my eyes were closed, I was aware of everything that was going on all around me. I was aware of my husband, who was distressed, but he was by my side holding my hand. I was aware of everything the doctors were doing. They were putting tubes in me. They were removing fluid from my lungs so that I could breathe easier. I was aware of every single thing that was happening. It felt as though I had 360-degree peripheral vision. I could see everything happening all around my body. But not just in the room where my body was, but even beyond. And it was as if I had expanded out of my body. I was aware of my physical body. I could see it lying there on that hospital bed. But I was no longer attached to that body. It felt as though I could be everywhere at the same time. It was like wherever I put my awareness, there I was. I was aware of my brother, who was in India. My body, I was in Hong Kong. This was happening to me in Hong Kong. My brother was in India. and was rushing to get on a plane to come and see me. He wanted to see me before I took my last breath. And I was aware of that. I felt as though I was with him. I saw him on the plane. And then I also became aware of my father and my best friend, both of whom I had lost. Both of them had crossed over, had died. But I became aware of their presence with me, as though they were guiding me and communicating with me. One thing that I felt in this amazing, expansive state, I felt I was in like a realm of clarity, where I understood everything. I understood why I had cancer. I understood that I was much greater. In fact, all of us are much greater and more powerful than we realize when we're in our physical bodies. I also felt as if I was connected to everybody, like all the doctors that were treating me, the nurses, my husband, my mother, my brother, and everybody. I felt as though we all shared the same consciousness. I felt as though I could feel what they were feeling. I could feel the distress they were feeling. I could feel the resignation of the doctors. But at the same time, I didn't get emotionally sucked into the drama, but yet I understood what they were feeling. It's like we all share the same consciousness. It's like when we're not expressing in our physical bodies, you and I and all of us, we are all expressions of the same consciousness. That's what it felt like. I felt as though my father was trying to communicate with me that it wasn't my time, that I needed to go back into my body. At first, I didn't want to go back because I still felt as though I had a choice whether to come back or not. So at first, I absolutely did not want to go back into my body because I couldn't see a single good reason to go back into this sick and dying body. I was a burden on my family. I was suffering. There was no good reason, so I didn't want to go back. But in the next instant, it felt as if I completely understood that now that I knew what I knew, and because I understood what caused the cancer, I knew that if I chose to go back to my body would heal very, very quickly. And so in that moment, I made the decision to go back, and I heard as though my father and my best friend said to me, now that you know the truth of who you really are, go back and live your life fearlessly. And it was in those moments that I woke up from the coma. And my family was so relieved to see me. And the doctors, they couldn't explain it. The doctors were there and they were surprised, but they were being very, very cautious because there was no way of knowing. I was still so weak. There was no way for anyone to know whether I was going to stay out of the coma or heal or go back. But I knew I was going to be fine, and I was telling my whole family, I'm going to be fine. I know I'm going to be fine. It's not my time. Within 5 days, the tumors in my body had shrunk by 70%. After 5 weeks, I was released from the hospital to go home. I was completely cancer-free. Now, what has happened is that I've had to pick up my life from that point. And as you can imagine, my life feels completely different. It changed my view of the world. That experience changed my view of our physical bodies, of my physical body, of illness, and how I perceive the world. I found it very difficult to integrate back into life again after that experience. And the best way I can think of to explain what it feels like would be to use metaphors. And a metaphor that I like to use is one of a warehouse. I'd like you to imagine, if you will, that we are in a totally darkened warehouse that's pitch black. Just imagine that right now you're in a warehouse that's completely pitch black and you can't see anything because it's so dark. You can't see anything in front of you anywhere. But imagine that in your hand you hold a little flashlight, just a little flashlight, and you switch on that flashlight. And with that flashlight, you navigate your way through the dark. And you use just the beam of that little flashlight to navigate your way in the dark. And everything that you see in the warehouse is only what you can see with the beam of that flashlight. Now imagine if the beam is shining over there, all you see is what's over there. Everything else is in darkness. You shine the beam over there, and all you see is that spot there. Everything else is in darkness except for the light of the beam. Now imagine one day, big floodlights go on, so the whole warehouse is illuminated, and you realize this warehouse is huge. It's bigger than you've ever imagined it to be. And it's lined with shelves and shelves and shelves of all kinds of different things. Every kind of thing you can imagine and things you can't even imagine all exist on these shelves, side by side by side. Some of these things are beautiful, some not so beautiful, some large, some small, some things in colors you've never ever seen before, colors you've never imagined to exist, and some things that are strange and funny looking, all exist side by side. And you've seen some of them before with your flashlight, but many of them you've never seen before because your flashlight had never shone on it. Now imagine if the lights go back off again, and you're back to one flashlight. Now, even though all you can see is what you see with the one flashlight, the beam of one flashlight, at least you now know there is so much more that exists simultaneously and alongside the things that you can see. You now know that just because you cannot see them, you cannot experience it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You now know that because you've had that experience. That's what it feels like to me. It feels like so much more exists than what we believe. So much more exists than what we have experienced. It's just beyond our flashlight. And just to help you understand that a little bit better, I'd like to try a little game, a little experiment with you. I want you to look around the room and find everything you can that is shades of red, everything from red to burgundy. Just look around and commit it to your memory. As many as possible, commit it to your memory, because I'm going to ask you to recall it. Okay, close your eyes, face the front. Now, how many things can you recall that are blue in color? Almost none. Think about it, almost. Now open your eyes and look around. See how many blue things there were that exist alongside the red, but you didn't even notice it. You didn't see it. Why? Because you weren't aware of it. The beam of that flashlight, what is that? That is your awareness. That beam is your awareness. When you flash your awareness on something, it becomes your reality. It becomes what you experience. There can be something else that's right under your nose, but if your flashlight is not shining on it, you won't even notice it. You won't even be aware of it. Think about this. Think about all the billions of dollars we are spending on cancer awareness. Think about all the cancer awareness campaigns. Imagine if we put that much money, energy, and effort into wellness awareness. What a different world we would have. Imagine if we put all our effort into peace instead of into fighting and wars. We would have a very different world if we changed our awareness.
I'm stopping here. I think everybody has that experience.